Go ahead. He's got good background on him, right?
Poor guy.
Don is the executive director of the Cass County Historical Society and is a longtime member there and has really done a lot of neat things since he took over a couple of years ago. And he's been into this, taking log cabins apart and putting them back together for a long time. It's a real big suit. If you ever need, anybody needs to know about that or how to go about that, he can really help you in that particular area. So anyway, from Harrisonville, Missouri, a long way down there, Don Peterson.
Yay!
Evening, everybody.
Evening.
Thank you for the invite. And what I'm going to do is, it's going to be kind of a three-part presentation. I'm going to talk to you about taking down or preserving a log cabin, which was what our game plan was. But then out of that, it turned into a hunt for history. And from that, I'm going to actually ask your guys' help as well, because we're this close to proving something really, really outstanding for the Bergen District area if we can prove it. And I just need a little bit of help with that. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through what happened in the process. And if you have any questions, keep this very open. Feel free to pop in and raise your hand or just give me a holler. Can you guys see that in the back? Because I can't get it a whole lot bigger.
Yep.
Okay.
Dang, you even got our name on your PowerPoint presentation.
I see that.
This man comes prepared.
I can suck up the best of them.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, I can. So a little bit of a story. I did, as Jim said, I've been at the Historical Society just under 2 years. And a year ago in November, minding my own business, Historical Society, I get a phone call from a real estate agent. He says, hey, a guy I know from Kansas just came over and he bought an 80-acre piece of property and he wants to turn it into a little weekend recreational area. And he said, it's got an old house on it. And the previous owner says that there's a log cabin in that house and that you own it. Like, all right, kind of news to me, but I'll go with that. I said, so what's the situation? He says, well, the owner wants to knock it down. If he doesn't want it anymore, it's supposed to be full of termites and it's in bad shape. So he wants to knock it down, put it in the ditch. And he's got a guy with a bulldozer coming out here giving him a bid on how much it's going to cost. And the bulldozer guy says, I'm not comfortable knocking down what looks like a log cabin. So the owner wants to know if you want it. Well, I'm a geek when it comes to history. I'll take about just about anything. And I'll definitely take a log cabin. So I said, well, let me come out and look at it and kind of see what we're up against, what you're talking about. So we went over and took a little drive, my wife and I, and we pull up in front of this. This is what we call a working name, the Sloan Trivia Cabin. But this cabin is about, I'll say 6 miles in from the Kansas border. It's about 1.5 miles away from Morristown would have been, if Morristown was still in existence. And it's set on a piece of property that's out in the middle of nowhere. You couldn't get within about 1/4 mile of this building to ever see what it is. That's how far it sat off the main road. Yes, sir.
Across the Kansas line, what town would be close to that, do you know?
The closest town, you know where Cass Midway School is?
Yes.
This sat just about straight north of there. The closest town it'd actually be to is Lake Annette.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but Lake Annette, obviously way back then didn't exist.
Well,
Yeah.
right.
So, but the town of consequence when it was going would have been Morristown back in the day.
Okay.
Not long after that, when West Line was a going fraction after the railroad came through.
Right,
It's kind of like between Morristown and West
Okay.
Line.
It's kind of between Freeman and Westland.
Yes, yeah, just a little bit north, to the west, north. North, it takes the big curve that curves
Yeah.
back west. If you go north, that's where this cabin's at.
Okay.
Not a bad looking house, was it? Really?
Actually, and I'll go into that more, but what you don't see is right behind this facade is a log cabin.
Cool.
So, as I say, we went out and took a look at it, and you couldn't see any exterior logs, but this was the inside of it.
Wow.
And what you're doing is, you are looking to the west, which really doesn't need much, but this is an addition, which was a 1.5-story addition put on, best guess is 1870. You know, it's just right after the war. And if you look where I'm standing, it's looking into a kitchen and bathroom that have been added on, who knows when, I think probably about the 20s would be my guess. They had a loft built in, just a very strange loft. I mean, it was maybe this high, and it made no sense. But subsequently to this picture, and talking to a lot of different people, at one time, this had 2 bedrooms up as a loft. And so the parents stayed up, or the kids stayed up there, and the parents moved into these 2 rooms for their bed. So the only thing this new owner knew about it was this cabin looking from this direction. Now, previous owners to the one we bought it from, they actually lived in this place, and they never ever knew it was a log cabin, except for looking underneath the sleeper logs in the basement. Because they had, over time, somebody had put, no, they didn't do sheetrock. They did that real cheap 1/8" plywood, and they painted it white. Yeah. So, this is what we had, and not knowing what people were looking for, as soon as I saw this, I mean, I fell in love, come on. It's a log cabin, and you just don't see these.
Cool.
The one thing they killed on, unfortunately, is notice that's a tile floor. So on a tile floor, they put a 4-inch thing of concrete in there, which completely wiped out all my sill logs. So, it happens, but, you know, it is what it is. If you look the other direction, this will go into that kitchen here, bathroom there. And this was a stove, obviously, they put in. And you can see that little loft up there as well. The cabin measures very close to 18 by 18, just about perfectly square. And it's a very high cabin. It goes up about 20 feet, which is a little bit higher than the normal one. But for this area, with the type of logs we have, these logs are very good size. They're definitely virgin forest and virgin growth. So we had this, and now we started, let's figure out actually what we have. So we took our research down to the family, the land, the cabin, and then we got into the preservation of it. And a lot of research we did in-house in the Historical Society. And what we found was Mr. Alfred Grundy Sloan. Sloan's owned the property, we knew nothing about A.G. Sloan. So we looked up in the history of Cass County, and A.G. Sloan and his wife, Sarepta Ann Sloan, they set out from Kentucky through Indiana. They came into Missouri in Pleasant Hill. They stayed in Pleasant Hill for a little while, and he had his brothers with him. And in Pleasant Hill, as they say, it was a long journey. They endured many hardships. When they first arrived in Pleasant Hill, they met an old Indian. They asked this Indian about, hey, we're looking for a piece of property. And the one thing I want to be sure it has is a lot of water. Well, this Indian told him that there's a place down where we found the cabin, obviously uninhabited at that point. That's just what you're looking for. So Sloan and the Indian went down, they saw the piece of property, and Sloan evidently had a prize bay horse, or black horse, I'm sorry, black horse. And according to legend is, they liked the property so much, they gave the black horse to the Indian. And then they, at that time, they squatted on it. And the time frame we're looking at is about 1835 to 1837. So this was a nice piece of information that we got right away. We then started looking a little bit deeper, and it wasn't the white that you saw up there about Sloan's wife. It was actually his first wife, Elizabeth Standiford, that came. Does that name ring a bell to you guys? Okay, I'll kind of cover that later. That kind of adds to our, as we're trying to replay the history of what it means, this kind of adds to it. But this is telling me the patents they got for the land, and they got 240 acres in 1845. The cabin had already been built by that time, because again, at that time there was no land office. They were just basically squatting on the land. And we know a little bit about the federal census and Sloan's kids, and of course his wife. So that was a good first part. We know a little bit about the family. Then we started looking about the land, and this is again talks about the hardship of the old Indian. But as a guide led into Cass County, north of Freeman, Missouri, and they found Twin Springs. And the Twin Springs fulfill what Sloan asked for. I wanted a lot of land on the land, or a lot of water on the land, and that's exactly what he got. So then we started looking at the plat. And this is the 1895 plat. This is Freeman, for those of you who know it now. Yes.
18 what year?
This is 1895 plat, okay? So 2 highway kind of comes down like this, comes up and curls out this way to give you juxtaposition. Morristown would be right here. Well, this is where that cabin sits. So as the crow flies, it's just maybe a mile and a half out of Morristown. Now, in 1895, the roads run a little bit different because this stair-step road no longer exists. The road currently goes up like this from Cass Midway School, and it comes up and it ends right there. So this was a road that we didn't know about, and this road no longer exists. Because this is the road that would go up into Lake Annette. For those you know what that is. So we had a pretty good idea who Sloan was, where he was, and where his cabin was. So then we kind of looked a little bit further. This is an 1877 plat, and as you can see, there's A.G. Sloan, and there's the cabin. So we have real good provenance of exactly where the cabin was. There's that stair-step road, and there's that road that goes straight north out of Morristown that no longer exists. Yes, sir?
How did they decide, whenever they was gonna go squat on land, how much acreage they wanted? They just, kinda say, oh, I want, 300 acres, 500 acres, or whatever, and just start marching it off and put their corner posts in or something?
Well, they kind of put the corner posts in, but then when the government came in with the land office, they started putting it into sections. And from the sections would then dictate the 40 acres, 80 acres, 160 acres, whatever.
They was already doing that by this time?
Yeah, so now somebody was already there and entranced in there, he had first right to get to the government first and say, look, I'm already there, this is how many acres I have. And then once those are all platted, then he could start buying more acres from whoever's the next guy.
And this would have been immediately after the plat purchase, which was about 31 or so.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been too far after that. Again, we're guessing
So it became-
37.
It started to become legal to buy the land versus squat on it.
But up until 45, it was never registered, so we don't see the, and if you, I mean, I skipped ahead of that. If you see the one down at the bottom, it says the original patent was an official document issued by the government, printed on sheepskin, came under James Polk's signature in 1848. So that's pretty typical for that area. It's been a little bit more towards the east and towards the north, but 48 is about right. So he was probably living on that ground maybe 10 years before he got actual control of it. So, the family, it was Alfred G., it was Sarepta White Sloan, that's his first wife, they came in. And again, there's a cemetery that was named after her family. And this is Alfred Sloan himself. And you may have noticed in our up front, we refer to this as the Sloan Tribby cabin, because after the war, his daughter married a guy named Mark Tribby. And Tribby then moved into this cabin, where at that time it became a house. So they have the cabin, they built it in later years. They put on a large two-story frame house that was built around it with the cabin in the middle. That's what you saw in that original picture. So I'll kind of walk you through what's what and what we're looking at. So this is what we had. And this is our picture from 2014. So we started a little bit of research back amongst families that knew this area. And one came up with a picture, and here's again, this is the Tribby family portion of it. But that cabin, that building originally looked like this. Now, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but to take a house that looks like this and turn it into the house that it was when we bought it, it just seems criminal. That's just a gorgeous house.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see how it progresses or degresses over time. That's what it looked like in the July of 2014. And again, here's the cabin behind here. This was a story and a half, which they turned into 2 stories. But it's really kept its same shape and the same look at it. It really hasn't changed much. But you go from that one with the real nice detail to this is just sand.
Tell that side.
Yeah, and this sand, I showed the bottom, hopefully nobody here works for Home Depot. It looks like a modern Home Depot house. Everything was plastic on it, was plywood, was paneling, and you'll see some of the pictures how it was built. Oh yeah, we got that. There's the satellite, this is the kitchen, there's the 2 bedrooms. Now to get up into the cabin, in that 2nd story, you have to go in this door, you have to come upstairs and put you outside here to walk around here to go in. So it made absolutely no sense. But we were told later that there was actually stairs inside the cabin, which would probably be pretty typical of this type of cabin, so I do believe that part. As we looked at it from taking it down, the biggest issue we're concerned is that this is a common roof system. We have no idea what's above the logs itself. We can only see this one that's been added. So to take it down, we realize we have to take it down in sections. So this section would be the easiest to take down because it's not a common roof. We know what that one's been added to it. Then we took down this second and this third. So I won't bore you guys with too much, but I'll kind of go through what we did. And again, these are the roofers we brought in. And what they did is they just separated the roof line. So then we could grab it with a claw and rip it back away from the cabin. Because my biggest concern was if we did it wrong, we're going to drop that entire roof system on top of the cabin and ruin the logs. And when I take down one of these cabins, to me the logs are everything. So we do everything we can to protect them as much as humanly possible. So here's what it looked like. We brought in a guide, Mike Magnus. Diane Magnus works for us at the Historical Society. Mike had his own construction business. And I've worked with a few guys on backhoes. I've never known anybody as good as Mike. I swear to God, I told people he could give you a shave and not cut you. He's that good. And so you can see he just started taking it just by bit. There's some of that real cheap plywood side that's been painted white. So this is the east side coming off. This is the south side coming off. There's the two-story one. And through all that mix, this is what we ended up with. And that cabin was in exceptional shape, except for what somebody did model. The big issue I always see with cabins is when people put an addition to it, they never quite understand how to waterproof it. So if there's an addition to it, you can bet you're going to have some rot. But this is how the cabin looks at. This would have been a window originally. They turned that into the door to get to the upper part. So it had a door to the east, a door to the west. This was cut out, but it was actually a window. And on the back side, I'll show you another picture. You can see where the original fireplace would have been. The fireplace would have been cut out of the logs and pushed back. So the rocks, flagstone, would actually be outside the cabin. And they did that mainly just for fire protection. We didn't realize the roof was on it until we got to this stage. But this looks, the best we can tell, is the original roof. Still had the original rafters in it. The logs are walnut and white oak. The rafter logs, I'm not that good on wood, but I have no idea what they were. They're much smaller, much rounder.
So these logs being walnut are extremely heavy.
Extremely heavy, yes.
Yes,
I would guess, I took down it was they called a double pen dog trap cabin outside of Hannibal, Missouri. The biggest log we took down was about, it was 23, so it was probably about 28 feet. That log weighed 710 pounds. I'm guessing these logs probably run around 500 to 600.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're plenty stout.
Well, they look to be about eight inches thick by 14 inches tall.
Closest to about 6 inches, because they have been hand hewn. This is a hand hewn log cabin. And what hand hewing means is they hewed the inside and outside flat. And you also notice that there is no logs sticking out of the corners. They do the corners flush. Well, this is kind of a German style. You know, log cabins, as they come across, they all change slightly with their styles. This is more the German style. But the reason they did that was they kept everything flat. So down the road, once they had a sawmill come in, they could cut clapboard and they could cover the logs. Because back then, they were as smart as we were. You want to protect those logs as much as possible. And until you get a sawmill and you get cut lumber, you're kind of stuck. But as soon as they get that, yes, they would have put clapboard siding on it. And actually, look, not too far in the distance, a lot of them would have put a metal roof on it, a standing seam metal roof, because they would have had that. Just a little side note, too, about this log cabin. I'm sure many of you guys have been to the Steamboat Arabia. Okay, that's 1855. They actually have a complete log cabin, complete down to the doorknobs and the door hinges that was on that boat. It's still in storage. It was heading up to some place around Omaha. But it was 100% complete building that was on that steamboat that went down.
But it was in pieces,
It was in
being shipped.
pieces, yep.
Well, they had kit homes back then too.
Do what?
They had kit homes back then too?
Yeah, it's basically, it's a prefab house.
I'll be darned.
It's a prefab
Modular
house.
home.
Sears
Yeah.
catalog.
That's what it
It
is.
basically it was the first Sears catalog. The only reason they don't have it on display is they don't have enough room to do it. So they still have it, and it's sitting in their freezers right now. But yeah, they say it's 100% complete, down to the windows, the window panes, the hinges, you name it.
Wow.
It's ready to go.
Is that concrete chinking in the, between the logs or is it?
Some of it is.
Okay.
When you put together a log cabin, that space that's in between, it's a two-step process. It's called chinking and dogging. Some just call it chinking overall, but chinking's first. If you look real close right there, you see what looks like stones set at an angle? That's the chinking. And with log cabins in this area, it's either stone or it's split pieces of wood. Now this cabin was all stone, except for one area right here, it had wood in there. So I'm guessing the stone was the first and this was just a patch. But what they cover it with, they had made a lot of additions to this cabin obviously, so they had put cement on there. But cement is really the worst thing to put on a log cabin because it doesn't seal well against that log and it won't take and hold when the logs start shrinking and growing when it comes to weather. But yeah, this is all stone in between, and stone that would have come from the property, so there must have been a quarry down there someplace that we never got that far into.
You were out in the middle of nowhere when that was built. You're talking about how heavy those logs are. I'm looking at those long ones stacked pretty tall. How did they get them up there?
Well, I can tell you from taking them down, when we get to about this level, 3 or 4 guys and I, we can put those in. When you start getting up here is when it gets tricky. So what they would have done is, they would have put a couple of planks running up to this log, and they'd have a rope going to the other side with a draft horse on it. And that draft horse would pull and lift those planks up. Now what's interesting about a log cabin is the guy that's down on the ground is hewing the sides. So he's hewing those 2 sides flat, but he's not putting a notch in. Each notch is individually notched to the log below it. So they would have rolled up that log, set it on the log below it, measure the notch, and then cut it right there on the spot and form fit it, because all the weight of these cabins is right there in those corners. They wanted that notch to be as tight as it possibly could be. So it took some very good, extremely good craftsmen to put these together. But despite everything we've done in modern time, you saw how bad they beat it up, look how good that cabin was. And it's so good that the owner of the land who saw it started cussing me out. He goes, if I would have known what was in there, I wouldn't have let you take it down, I would have kept it. And I'd keep that in a second.
I don't know if it's worth going into, but you know, the way they cut those notches, the weight of the log would suck them, it pulled the cabin together. They were all notched with angles, and it was designed to, I don't know, on this cabin, maybe you can talk about that. There you go. I'm
Yeah.
just stealing his thunder. Talk about it.
This is a cabin of this type. You're going to see one of 3 different ways typically, at least up in this area. One is they call a V-notch. Some refer it to as a chapel notch down south. One is called a dovetail, and one's called a half dovetail. This is actually a half dovetail. So you can see the dovetail there, and then it flattens out. So this is just a straight half dovetail. But when you put together a log cabin, or when you take it down, when you put together that first log that goes on, the next log is the one on the opposite side. Then you go this way, and then this way. And then when you go the next way, it's the same thing. People think you build a log cabin like this. No, you put here, 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 here. Here, 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 here.
Pulling together as you build it.
Correct, because this log has to be in place before you bring this log over. And this log has to be in place before you bring this one over. So what someone would have done is, they would have had this full log on top of this one. They'd measure that cut, and then they just mirror it on this log. And that would have been done by, they'd have a hatchet up there, and a heck of a sharp blade.
So it'd be like a front, back, right, left, all the way up.
Yep, and so if we take it down, I've got to do the opposite.
Oh, right.
I've got to take that top log there, then this one, then that one, then this one.
Otherwise it'll cave in on you.
Yes.
Give us that order again. It was this one.
That one, this one.
This
I'll
one,
show you
opposite
when we start,
Okay.
when you show us taking it down.
Front, back, right, left.
This is a door frame. And you notice what is,
Front, back, right, left.
you notice these? That's wooden pegs. That's what's holding that cut log up in the door
Not
frame.
nails.
When you take down these cabins, structurally, there's not a single nail in it. They're all wood pegs, and that's it. And the wood pegs are the door frames, the window frames, and then your very top log is pegged to the one below it. And that's exactly how this cabin was. Now, this cabin went on to also have pegs in the roof rafters, which is a little bit unique. So they did do a crow cutout, crow foot, and then they pegged it in at the bottom. Okay, Larry, back to your point. See this log here? This is the top log, which is pegged into this one. So when we take this log down, we then have to go on the other side of the building and take away its sister log. Then I can take this one and this one, and then you just repeat. Now, every one of the logs we have, and I didn't know how long this would be, so I cut it out, but every one of those logs is numbered. And what we do is, that's a little bit different from what the pros do, is my wife will take a picture of this side, and we'll go in, we'll develop it, we'll bring that picture out to the cabin site. And when I was working before I was asked to retire, I was in the animal health industry. Well, being in the animal health industry, I know a lot of veterinarians. What I do is, I take their old rabies tags. Because rabies tags, you know, are only good for a year. So if you got 1,000 rabies tags at the beginning of the year and you only use 800, you got 200 of them to throw away. But rabies tags are sequentially numbered. So what we do is, after we have this picture taken, my wife will sit back here with the picture and I'll be up here and I'll point to this log and say, that's gonna be number 252. She'll put that in magic marker on the log, then I'll put the tag in. Well, the rabies tags are aluminum, they're not gonna rot out on me. They're not gonna cause much damage from a simple nail. And we also put the tag in the far right-hand side. So that tells us which way is inside outside and which way it sits on the building. So if we ever lose a tag, we've got a picture taken of that same log, and we can just go ahead and put it right back. Now, this is taken from the back. When we got it, this had a door here. Well, remember the picture on the inside where you saw that stove with the wraparound? The stove set here, you can see the pipe to it. This would have been the original chimney. The chimney been on the outside, it would have gone up, so this would not have been there. Now, most cabins, when you see that, you'll see signs of a chimney fire at one point or the other. You can see it right there. See a little bit of charcoal? So it could have even been that the chimney fire burned through this. And I've taken down a couple of cabins like that. The chimney, you can see where it actually burned through. But yeah, so this would be called in cabinese a single pen, which had one room cabin, and it's a pen because the fireplace is on the outside. So that's how you identify it. We did find two signatory, I guess you could say, carvings of letters. One is a W and one is a J. I have no idea what they meant. I'm assuming it was just the guy that built it, just kind of made his mark and put it on. But that's the first I've seen that in a log cabin. Thought that was kind of interesting. There you can see some of the boards and some of the notches. Interesting is, you know what that is?
Beeswax.
Newspaper.
Oh,
At one point, the entire inside of that cabin would have been covered by newspaper.
Insulation.
Insulation, but also, that was their wallpaper.
right. Because you could put, yeah.
Now, the sad part is, people just don't understand that, but the people who had it directly before when we got it, she thought this looked pretty ugly, so she took a pressure washer and washed off all the newspaper. Which just kills you when you see that. But we did find these that had a little bit on there. And the newspaper, the one part is about 5 different layers thick. And the ones we could read were in the 1880s. And they came from very interesting. They came from the Republican newspaper out of St. Louis. They came from the Democrat out of Harrisonville. And they came from a newspaper out of Oklahoma. Which we thought that's kind of weird for 1890. This log, you get a pretty good idea. This is what the roof rafters were into. And you can see how a hand hewn log is done. That's the axe chops. And then they just take a broad axe and they smooth it off. This one, you can just basically, that's what we have. I mean, that's what was left with us.
Looks good. Where are you gonna put it?
I have absolutely no idea. I really don't, but it's one of those, I could not stand the thought of it got destroyed. So we took it down, it's sitting in the barn right now. We'll figure out what we're gonna do with it, but right now we have absolutely no plans. We just really don't know.
Sharon,
You wanna keep it in
here's a
Cass
chance for
County.
us.
You want to-
Yes,
That's what I was gonna
keep
say.
as Cass County as
Let's
best
throw 'em
I
back to
can.
your place.
Now, some people have asked that we put it up in Missouritown 1855, which is another option, but I really want to keep it in the county. I couldn't leave it where it was, and unfortunately, there's just not enough left to Freeman to put it any place around Freeman. So,
It's not much.
yeah, we just have to figure out, I mean, I put it any place in the county because it's got a lot of county ties all over. And there's also, we could put it next to the Justice Center there in Harrisonville, where the Burke District chimney is.
Right.
And that'd be pretty cool, we put it right next to that. So we're exploring all these options.
What about over there by Sneed? Or not necessarily Sneed's, either Sneed's or Westline.
Yeah, and again, it's option. The main thing we want to do though is where it's gonna be, we want people there, they can kind of keep an eye on it. And that's one of the reasons why the owner wanted this down so quick, because he was afraid the kids would find out about it and get in there and just end up burning it down.
Yeah.
This is the side where the story-and-a-half log cabin was on. And again, when I talk about water, you see how these logs are shot. So there is quite a bit of rot on them. They'll just need to be replaced, there's no saving them. And a lot of the times when the water gets into a log, it'll get in right in the middle. So this part will pop off from rot, and the inside part looks like it's perfectly good shape. And there's quite a bit of that in this particular cabin.
Kind of goes into the heart of the wood.
Yeah, and once it gets it, it just plays off.
Yeah.
So here's how we took it down. Now, we originally started taking it down with this claw, but the claw is a track on tracks. So he's got to take this log down, which is easy, but then he's got to move all the way over again to take that other one. And then he's got to move it over back and forth. So we kept the claw there until we got to about here, then we brought in a fork. And once you have a fork, it comes down like that, it comes down very quickly.
Yeah, you're just lifting them off really once you got everything off the top, right?
Yeah.
They're not really nailed or nothing in the
No,
corners?
once you pop those top pegs, then you're good to go.
Yeah.
So this is our favorite picture. This is probably almost identical how that cabin looked when it was first put up.
Pretty
It's
cool.
about the best, yeah, it's just really cool. This is the south, west, east, north, and this is where they put on the addition over time. And again, you notice where all that rot is? That's where that addition went. This is fairly clear of rot. Now you also see there's furring strips. Why? Again, they put clapboard siding on when they got a chance to protect the logs. That's just what you do. So, that's what we got. And back to the Alfred Gundy's part, the family says during the Civil War, Kansas bushwhackers, came over the border, burning and stealing. They came to the Sloan place, but the family hid in the small basement of the log cabin, and they did not find them. I've never known a log cabin to have a chimney, or a basement rather, to have a basement. I've taken down a bunch of them, never a basement. This log cabin had a basement. Now, the front part of it, when you went down into it, it's got the mechanicals for the entire house. So they had dug that down deeper, and that took up an area probably about here at the end of the table. But if you look past that, you can see the sleeper logs underneath, you can see the original rock foundation, and sure enough, it's not what I call a basement, it's really what I call a crawl space, but it was probably about 3.5 feet deep, so indeed somebody could go in there and hide. I couldn't prove the point, because remember I mentioned before, they put in a cement base and they tiled that floor, so I couldn't see if there was a trapdoor. And unfortunately, I couldn't save all these lower logs because of that, because that's nothing but 6 inches of concrete that's sitting on the side.
You couldn't look up at the bottom from underneath and see if there was a cutout or a place where a cutout.
I couldn't get back in that far.
Oh, far enough.
Because of all
okay.
time, because the area they had cut out, just right inside here, is nothing but a furnace and a hot water tank, and it took up really the whole area. So I just didn't have a chance to do it.
Yeah.
When we got this cabin the 1st of November, the owner wanted it down by the end of that year. I told him, man, I just can't guarantee that. So he said, we'll have it down in the before spring. Well, if you guys know last year, come March, it rained every weekend.
Right.
Yes,
So
it
we
did.
finally took it down on Memorial Day. That was our one shot, we knew we could get equipment in there, and we knew we could pop it down. So that's what we did.
That was a long day, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, taking it down to this was one day. Then we came back the next day and we popped off these logs to here. And then we came back a half of another day and we took the rest of the logs out. So realistically, it took 2 days. Yes, sir.
So once that owner saw it looking like that, you think he was regretting giving it away?
100%.
I'm sure he
I sent him
was.
that picture and he says, if I knew that's what was underneath there, I would not have given it to you. And he did give it to us.
Yeah.
This was a donation to us. And yeah, I mean, that just, to me, that just tells volumes.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
So what would he have done with it if he hadn't given it
Did
to you?
that.
Well, if I was him, I would have restored it to this. And what he's putting is he bought 80 acres, got about a 5-acre lake out there, and he was gonna do it as a weekend getaway. So I would have used that as.
I stayed in a cabin like that over 4th of July weekend. As a cabin had been relocated to a guy's little vacation property, and we rented it and stayed in the cabin.
And I always joke with kids, with the Shark Hopper cabin in our historical society, I always ask the kids, would you live in this? They're like, oh, no, no. I turned to the parents, I said, would you take this cabin next to a lake down in the Ozarks? Hell yeah!
Right.
About that quick. And that's, yeah, what I would do with that too. So this would have been the mainstay of that 60-acre farm owned by Sloan.
No family burial grounds?
No, you know, we didn't find a cemetery nearby in this one, which kind of surprised us. There is the white cemetery, but not that close. But no, where this stands, it's the closest cemetery that we know of would be Morristown. Yeah, John, did you have something?
Is there any way to put a dollar value on what that house represents right now? I mean, in our money, what would the value of that be historically and dollar-wise?
It depends on who's got the cabin.
Right.
If they know what they're doing versus somebody that doesn't, it ranges. Because people think that's a $60,000, $70,000 cabin in pieces. It's really not. It's maybe a $10,000 to $20,000 cabin in pieces. And how most people sell it. By the way, you guys get cable TV,
Yeah,
Barnwood Builders.
which is misnamed. It should be Logwood Builders.
Exactly right, exactly right. And we do what they do, just, we all have kind of certain little things that they do different. But there's some websites you can get on and look it up, and you can buy this cabin down with the floor plans to it for probably about $20,000.
You're talking about new law, you're talking about today.
No.
No,
one
take
that's
it
been
down just
taken
like
down.
this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can tell you, we saw from that first picture, you can drive by that cabin every day of the week for 40 years, never knew there was a log cabin in there. There's still log cabins out there. I know of one other one in Cass County that's inside the building
I
too.
know one in Jackson County.
Yeah,
Off of Raytown Road, north of 95th Street.
yeah,
It's
and,
inside the house.
and the most they're inside a house, the longer they stay viable.
A lot of
Number of
side
different
barns.
reasons.
Yeah, protected.
Yes, a lot of wood barns.
What do you live in and where'd you get it?
The one I live in now?
Yeah.
I don't live in it yet.
Oh
We've
my.
got 4 cabins. I live just north of Harrisonville in an 1892 farmhouse, and we've got the original 1910 barn, and I've got the cabin stored in the barns. But I've got 4 of them.
The one from Hannibal?
The one from Hannibal is actually 4 times this size. It's a 1,400 square foot. Just, I'm kind of off the path here, but I'll go through this real quick.
Wow.
You guys know where Paris, Missouri is? You guys heard of Paris? Well, back in the 1850s, they built back then what they called a toll road. What a toll road was, some called it a corridor road. They just split off wood to about 2 inches thick, and they laid it like you'd lay the ties in a railroad track. And then they would set up toll gates. And the toll gate is where you stopped every so often and paid the money to go in that road. Well, their toll gate was more like a tavern / holding place. So if you're coming up the road with a load of cattle, you could come into this toll gate, spend the night, and have a place, a corral to put your cattle or your turkeys or whatever you herd. So the cabin we took down in Hannibal has another side right over here, and it's got a big opening in the middle, which is what we call a breezeway. It's called a dog trot. So our cabin is 2 stories high with the dog trot. So ours is a double pen dog trot. And we took it down because same thing, guy grew up in it. His father passed away, gave him the land. The cabin had asbestos siding on it. It was falling apart. And he built a brand new retirement home right behind it. So this was blocking his view, and he was just gonna knock it down and burn it. That particular one I got for $10,000. And that was a 4-room, about 1,400 square foot. So that kind of gives you an idea of the range of them. So we got this, and then something very weird happens. And you guys familiar with Tom Rayfiner? In his book, Sinners in Silence. I've read Sinners in Silence once. I was just happened to be reading it again. And out of the blue, I turned to page 210. That says, during the afternoon of August 22nd, now this is the second day after Quantrell's reign. Great. General Ewing met with James Lane, who had narrowly escaped death in Lawrence. The two men met in a cabin near Morristown ruins. And I'm like, whoa, we just took down a cabin near Morristown ruins. Could it be? So we just kind of started playing that around and doing a little bit of work. And then we're thinking, well, why wasn't that cabin burnt with everything going on? Somebody knocked on the door in the middle of the night, but why did that cabin survive? Well, let's go back to Sandiford. Remember his first wife's last name? Well, now, Sandiford did live here, and then he moved over to Kansas. Well, he was the bigwig in the Kansas party in their Congress. Sloan moved over there. So what our thinking is, Standerfoot would have known about that cabin because his sister lived in that cabin. That would make sense why that cabin might have survived. So we're starting to think, maybe there's something to this story. Then we found that Quantrell in the Border Wars by Conley. A lot of people refer to this in Quantrell's raid. If you look in one section, General Ewing and Lane met at the point where Quantrell had stopped first after crossing back into Missouri. Now that's got us thinking, okay, we know where Quantrell came back roughly. We know he stopped before they split up. And this is telling us that they met near that spot. So we started digging deeper. A short distance beyond the place where the guerrillas first encamped after getting back into Missouri, Leland found a guerrilla walking about a cabin with a woman. He surrendered. The woman claimed to be his wife. He finally admitted that she was. He was dressed throughout new clothes. He confessed he'd been to Lawrence, so they hung him. So now we're like, is that this cabin? Because this is all keying on where did Quantrell stop when he came back from Kansas. So this one, I'm not sure about this story, but it's getting more intriguing all the time because there's a meeting place where Quantrell stopped. We looked up Captain J.A. Pike. He was following Quantrell. He was the Union officer that was following him. This says where he passed out outside of Kansas, and they came down the southern fork of the Grand River. Well, if you guys know on Quantrell's raid, when he went into Kansas, he went along the fork of the Grand River because he was in the trees and he couldn't be seen. This is saying he's coming back the same way by the branch of Grand River, south of the branch where Quantrell went in, he came out again. So this one's kind of hard to see.
Would be just a little bit north of the Osawatomie area, wouldn't it?
Well, where he actually came, when he went in, he
Osawatomie.
came up through here, that's Olathe. When he came out, he came down here.
Right.
So he went in Johnson, he came out in Miami County. There's Harrisonville. Here's where he came out of.
Yeah, that would be Halo, Osawatomie area.
Northeast of Lewisburg.
Yes, northeast of Lewisburg now, yes. So again, this is the military atlas, so we're getting a little bit closer to this. If you blow this up, here's Aubrey. When he first went in, he went to the south side of Aubrey. When he came out right across here, and that cabin sits right about here.
Wow.
So we know he's real close to the cabin, but we don't know where he stopped. And that's the big thing we just keep looking at. Here's Miami County, and we have a real good notation, is that he came right here. So we can pretty much, you know, when you're trying to put a map of one state up to another state, they never quite match. But we know he came through here, and here's the cabin. So we just keep looking, where did he stop? That's the whole key to this, where did he stop at? I found this just recently. And Jim, do you remember this one? I guess Carol Bull had this done.
Yes,
okay? I happened to be in the hospital there in Harrisonville. My wife was having foot surgery, me being a guy with ADHD, I'm wandering the halls, and I see they've got this map up there. Well, I get to looking closer to it, and this is the first map I've ever seen that says, this is Quantrell's return. Okay, that's where they stopped, and that's where they split up. Okay, keep your eye on this formation of the river right there. There's that formation, there's the cabin. So we know it's this close to be in the cabin that they got together and met in. Well, what their meeting was about was, okay, Lane was in Lawrence since Quantrell's raid. He jumped out, the old story, he ran half naked out into a cornfield. After Quantrell left, Lane got together with Ewing and they started chasing him. Lane was livid at that point because he ran out of his house, number one, but also Lawrence got sad. The story goes that as they come over into Missouri, and I'll use this just as talking points, they come into Missouri, Quantrell stops and then splits apart. Lane pulls Ewing aside and he takes them to whichever cabin and he basically reads them the riot act. And the riot act is, in a nutshell, you SOB, I told you to put together General Order Number 11, you haven't done it yet. You do it now or I'm sacking you. So this is, according to lore, that's when they finally decided, yes, we're doing General Order Number 11, and then they announced it a couple days later up in Kansas City. But it is our belief, what we can find, and I just don't have that final, yes, you're right, Don. It's our belief that could very easily have been the cabin where General Order Number 11 was finalized. Not written, not announced, when they finally said, we're doing it. Yeah.
That Cass County map showed Quantrell's route, and it just skirted just south of that fork in the river, right? So what do you think that difference in, what is that, a quarter mile, where the star is compared to that fork? Is it a quarter mile, half mile, mile?
I'll tell you, first off, this is somebody did a good job on this, but it's not really accurate as far as distances, as you can kind of see, you know.
Not to scale.
Yeah, these aren't the scale. To give you an idea, from here to here is about 3 miles.
All right, so
Just
that's
to
about
kinda
the
give you-
same.
But still, following that curve, the bottom of the curve, a river goes on further down to the Grand. So
Correct.
that's where they're following the bush. So how close to that north-south creek is that house?
Yeah, how far is that
Yeah,
on
the
that map?
distance, that's
There's the creek,
Yeah?
Yeah?
there's the house.
Okay, so,
Yeah, but how far north to that fork in the
What's the
creek?
distance?
I've never, this is all open farmland. I've never seen it. I would say it's less than a mile. But if you
Okay.
can tell, this is a plat map, okay? Here's a square mile. You notice these, they're elongated. They had double ones when they first plotted in West Dolan County. So a mile from, this would be about a mile marker to right there. So it would probably be just
so
under
you're
a
within a
mile.
mile.
Yeah,
A mile south of the fork or a mile back west from the creek, which is what, the Grand River?
correct. And that's what kind of flows in here down to the Grand River.
A mile's
And-
close enough to where that map showed them coming, a mile's nothing, you know?
And particularly if this road and this road were back then, that's what they would have ridden on. They obviously knew about Morristown because Ewing was in charge of Morristown at the time. And then you got the tie-in to Sarepta, the second or the first wife.
What is the street number south, like 250th, 260th?
It was a 315.
So this cabin's about 315?
315, 355, forget which one. Yeah. Now again, if you do it, 2 highway is here, and this would be Cass Midway School right here. And you go up about a mile, and then you cut across, and this road just ends. And it ends right at the property line of that cabin, 80 acres. So my question to you guys is, well, first off, any other questions from you?
Come on, Brian. Doing like you work again.
Well, Quantrill probably would have known if that cabin was standing, so he said there's a good place to sit down for a while and relax, you know?
Well, Quantrill knew the Union was right on his tail. And when they got, it's my understanding, when they got back to Missouri, they paused, and they basically said, they're coming after us, we gotta get out of here. So Quantrell took the main force and headed up towards Pleasant Hill. And that's where they had that skirmish the next day. The southern half of his group just kind of disbanded into the air. And we're thinking that happened just right in here someplace.
So these plats, back in, what did you say earlier, they started making these plats around 1848 or something like
Yeah,
that?
when they started platting off the land.
Don't they have records on those as far as, was there any of these other log cabins that would be just like that?
That's kind of my
In the area.
question. What other log cabins would have been in the area at the
A
time?
plat book doesn't show buildings. A plat map will, but it does some years and it doesn't some years.
Okay.
Do you know of any other cabins in that area at the time?
Well, I'll kind of show you from 1877, I just had it right there and I lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of
I'm sure there's lots of people around.
commerce
but
going
the hell
down that
many?
way. I hope this opens up for me.
Shows you who owns the property, but it doesn't show you where the buildings are.
Well, this one
Oh,
does.
some does.
Every black one
Little
is a
black
building,
dot.
okay?
Further down the road. That's what we're talking about.
So if you look at the Sloan, that's this cabin.
Right.
You don't see a whole lot of other cabins real close to it. You see very few up here, you see a little bit here, there's a couple, and there's one, but there's just not that many.
Looks like J.D. Liggett there.
Was it just all farm ground or pasture land, or was it,
This one is
or
prairie.
was it burned out from before, you know?
Yeah, this would have been prairie, mainly open farmland, would have trees that are around the waterways. And there's a lot of waterways right up in there.
Right there, yeah.
Yeah, but so our guessing is, if this theory is right, and I lost Sloan again, okay, here's Sloan, I'm guessing Quantrell came out up here. But we're not seeing too many of the signs of a building. And again, this is also 22 years after the Civil War.
Right.
And this is just the earliest plat we have that shows buildings. Yes, ma'am.
Just doing some quick searches here. I, first of all, found out that his middle name is really Guy and not Grundy. His mother's maiden name was Guy, and that he is buried in Paola, Kansas, and that farm had 360 acres.
Yeah, it is. We have had a hard time doing research on him first, a lot of it because of his name. It's listed at different places. Some Grundy with his second wife listed, and not a whole lot listed his first wife. He did get the original at 80 that he had built up to, the more, and he left right as the war started. He went over to Kansas. He came back for a short while. He gave the property to Trivy, who was his son-in-law. Then he moved back to Paola.
Right.
And so that's why he's buried there in Paola.
Actually, Sarepta's his second wife, so this.
The first line is the Standiford.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sarepta White was the second. And
Right.
White, which I don't think it's on here, she was in I believe it was down in here. Her family owned one of the land real close to his. They were definitely neighbors. So my question to you guys, do you have any people that you know are big fans, researchers of Quantrell's raid? And not so much going into the raid, I'm looking at coming back from the raid.
Paul Peterson's probably the biggest fan we know, isn't
I
he?
don't know, how about Jay Roberts? And
Possible.
Jackie?
Yeah, we know some people.
I've talked with Jay on this, and again, they know a lot, and there's a lot of books written about Quantrell going into the raid. Then they just talk about he came back to Missouri and expanded.
Well, that's 14 wins.
What I'm hoping to find is a diary, is a journal, is a report. Now granted, Quantrell's not writing a whole lot of reports to a higher command like the Union is, but someplace there's gotta be that someone can match the name up that say they stayed at the Sloan property or the Sloan farm or the Sloan cabin. So that's our quest. That's kind of where I'm coming to my hat in my hand with you guys.
If they did, and if they would have named names of where they stayed, because back then, it wasn't a popular thing to name names.
Particularly with Quantrell,
Or
who's coming back and he
Yeah.
knows I name names, it's gonna come back to bite
You know,
me.
look at the amount of places that was burned
I
out.
stayed away from where he left.
I'm a new member of the Quantrell Society, I'm on the board now.
Friends of
I
Elmo.
have been to our
That's right.
first meeting yet. I'll start asking some questions.
That'd be great, and I'll give you my card if you can find anything out. You know, it's one of those I look at, we're so close, But the other thing I look at is, if you look at this cabin, you know, and everybody, we know and we've seen 1,000 times Appomattox Courthouse and what that meant to the eastern side of the war. This cabin could be huge. If truly, if you think about it, those two met and finalized General Order Number 11 in a building that still exists. And we have the rights to it.
It makes sense that that is a cabin. It was a Yankee cabin, basically. The owner's got Kansas legislature ties. You know, they probably knew that he owned that piece of
And it was
property, and that's
never
probably why
burned
they
down.
went there.
And the burned down part is interesting. When I first took over the Historical Society, and a lot of people think General Order Number 11, they just scorched the land entirely. What we're finding is, and I can probably rattle off about 20 dwellings right now that I know survived the war, but they shouldn't have. You know, on paper, they should have been burned. But what we're noticing is, if you look at a town like Morristown, which we know Morristown was a federal post, you go about a mile and a half diameter around those towns, we are finding more and more buildings that survived the war. Well, as Larry and I were talking about Eaton, it makes sense. If you've got an army post here, they're gonna post pickets out around that. And if I'm a lieutenant in this kind of weather at a picket post, I can either sleep on a tent or the ground, or I can confiscate that log cabin. I'm gonna confiscate that log cabin. So it just, we're seeing these little pockets like that. One around Harrisonville, we've got the one around Morristown, we've got one down by Dayton. It just seems to be these cabins that survive.
Makes sense.
And it does make sense. If you think just what we would do today, we'd go be looking for a building, and that'd be our quote-unquote headquarters, or a place to shack out at. So this cabin right now, as we see it, is taken apart, it's numbered, it's under plastic, and it's sitting in a barn. We've got it up on boards, there's good flow through it. It can stay there for a few years, but we just have to figure out the next step, what we're gonna do with it.
We still do that today in war. Requisition homes. My boys stayed in many Iraqi and Afghan homes.
Yeah.
You know, in both those places, like, okay, this is our home now.
And if I know that my quadrant is the northwest quadrant going out of Morristown, and there's a cabin like this that I can pivot around, I'll tell you what I'd be doing.
Yeah.
It just makes common sense.
So it could have survived just for that, even if the homeowner didn't have Yankee sympathies, like you're saying.
And that just kind of builds on it, just kind of puts that extra layer. Yes,
So
sir?
this now belongs to the Cass County Historical Society?
Yeah.
And are they eventually gonna budget money for a new foundation or erecting it somewhere? Or
We don't know what we're gonna do with it yet. I had to take it down when I did, or it was gonna get destroyed. So, right now, it's down, it's safe, it's covered. We're just really weighing options. But I'm really kind of leaning towards putting it up by the Burnt District Monument there
Be a
in
great place
Harrisonville.
for it.
And then if we can tie into that, into the story we think it is, that'd be huge. That'd really truly be huge.
That's a good location because of the
Triple
highway,
across.
people see it.
Triple
Yeah.
across.
And that's part of the problem with the Burnt District, when people just drive right by it, they don't see what it is. This would stand out. But we gotta work that through the county, because that's county land, and we started the process, but it's gonna be a
I
while.
think they'd be real receptive to it, I would think, you know, if there's the space there to do it.
And you know, like you mentioned, the road's going by it, you can have a sign right there, and you can see it. You're gonna get people to stop and look at it.
Order number 11 cabin, people are like, what's that?
And it survived. And again, this is one by rights.
What's the Civil War?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. This should have been a pile of ashes if you read General Order Number 11. But something saved it. Or someone saved it for a reason. That's all I got. Any other questions?
Any
I really
burning
appreciate-
questions?
Really appreciate your guys' invite and letting me come up here and chop at a free meal and a beer and nothing wrong with that.
Sure. And we'll send I'll kind of assimilate your cell phone and email address, and maybe we can filter to some of these guys that we think might be able to nail some of that stuff down.
Yeah, that'd be great. There's a lot of people that have a lot smarter than I am. And that they really know this, they'll know where and it's just so consistent. Where Quantrill stopped, where Quantrill stopped, where Quantrill stopped. So we just need to find where Quantrill stopped.
It's awesome. Good job saving it, too. Let's give them a hand, all right, folks?